In the digital age where swipes replace handshakes and profiles become introduction, a young woman's dream adventure turned into a nightmare that would capture global attention. Grace Emmie Rose Millane, a bright-eyed 22-year-old from Essex, England, had the world at her feet. Fresh from university graduation, she embarked on a journey across continent, documenting her adventures with infectious enthusiasm. But in the bustling streets of Auckland, New Zealand, during what should have been a birthday celebration, Grace vanished without a trace. The disappearance of this vibrant backpacker would spark an international investigation, revealing the dark shadows that lurk behind smartphone screens and dating apps. What began as a typical night out would end with a suitcase, a shallow grave, and a community shattered by betrayal. But after years of silence, a single clue would shatter everything. Before I tell you what happened, comment your country and time below. December 1st, 2018, Auckland, New Zealand. Summer was approaching in the southern hemisphere, bringing with it long, golden days and mild evenings that stretched into night. The city pulsed with the energy of tourists and locals alike, drawn to its harbors, volcanic landscapes, and vibrant nightlife. It was in this setting of possibility and adventure that Grace Millane found herself thousands of miles from home, celebrating a milestone birthday weekend in a foreign land. Grace had arrived in New Zealand in November 2018, the latest stop on a post-graduation world tour that had already taken her through South America and Asia. Her social media accounts painted a picture of joy and wonder, hiking majestic mountains, exploring ancient ruins, and meeting fellow travelers from around the globe. Friends and family back in Wickford, Essex, followed her journey through photos and messages, sharing in her excitement from afar. She was living her dream, her mother Jillian would later recall. Every message was filled with such enthusiasm. She was seeing the world, experiencing new cultures, growing as a person. Grace was the youngest of 3 children, deeply connected to her family despite the distance. Her parents, David and Jillian, had raised their children with a sense of adventure and curiosity about the world. Grace's decision to travel after completing her business management degree at the University of Lincoln came as no surprise to those who knew her. She was described as compassionate, intelligent, and fiercely independent, qualities that would serve her well on her solo journey. On her 22nd birthday, December 2nd, Grace's family sent messages that went unanswered. This was unusual. Despite the time difference in her busy travel schedule, Grace had maintained regular contact with her loved one. As hours stretched into a day, concern began to mount. By December 3rd, with still no word from Grace, her family reported her missing to authorities in New Zealand. Detective Inspector Scott Beard of the Auckland City Crime Squad was assigned to the case. Beard, a veteran investigator with decades of experience, recognized the urgency. A missing person case involving a foreign tourist required swift action, as every hour diminished the likelihood of a positive outcome. The investigation began with methodical reconstruction of Grace's final known movement. CCTV footage from around Auckland became the investigators' primary tool, offering silent testimony to Grace's last hour. The footage revealed a young woman enjoying her evening, seemingly unaware of the danger that lay ahead. On the evening of December 1st, Grace had been active on Tinder, the popular dating app. She matched with a 27-year-old man named Jesse Kempson. Their conversation quickly progressed from text to a meeting. CCTV footage captured Grace entering the Sky City Casino around 6:30 p.m., dressed in a dark top and light-colored pants, her blonde hair pulled back in a casual style. She appeared relaxed, scrolling through her phone as she waited. Kempson arrived shortly after. The footage showed them greeting each other with a hug before moving to the casino's bar area. Security cameras followed them as they shared drinks and conversation. After approximately an hour, they left the casino together, walking to nearby bars in the central business district. At the base bar, they were seen ordering more drink. Bartenders would later recall them as an apparently normal couple, laughing, talking, showing no signs of distress. The last known sighting of Grace alive came from CCTV footage outside the City Life Hotel on Queen Street at approximately 9:41 p.m. In the grainy images, Grace and Kempson entered the building together, disappearing from public view. As investigators pieced together this timeline, a sense of urgency grew. Grace's hotel room was found untouched, her belongings still packed as if she expected to return soon. Her phone had been turned off shortly after entering the City Life Hotel with Kempson, a detail that set off alarm bells for the investigative team. Meanwhile, Grace's family had made the difficult decision to fly to New Zealand. David and Jillian Millane arrived in Auckland on December 5th, accompanied by Grace's older brother. They held press conferences, their faces etched with worry, but clinging to hope. Jillian described her daughter as our beautiful, caring, intelligent daughter, and appealed directly to the public for information. "We just want to know where she is," Jillian said, her voice trembling but determined. "If anyone has seen anything, please come forward. We need to bring Grace home." The community response was immediate. Volunteers organized search parties. Local businesses displayed Grace's photo in their windows. The story gained international attention, with media outlets around the world covering the disappearance of the young British backpacker. But as days passed with no sign of Grace, hope began to fade. Detective Beard and his team intensified their effort, focusing on Jesse Kempson as a person of interest. When questioned, Kempson claimed that he and Grace had parted ways after their date, insisting she had been alive when he last saw her. But inconsistencies in his story raised suspicion. The breakthrough came when investigators obtained CCTV footage from a local hardware store. On December 2nd, the day after Grace's disappearance, Kempson was seen purchasing a large suitcase and cleaning supplies. Later footage showed him returning to the City Light Hotel and, several hours later, leaving with a heavy suitcase that he struggled to carry. He was then seen loading the suitcase into a rental car. The implications were chilling. As investigators worked to track Kempson's movement, they reviewed CCTV from a hotel service elevator. The footage revealed bloodstains on the carpet outside Kempson's apartment door. Forensic teams were dispatched to the room, where they discovered extensive cleaning efforts, but under specialized lighting, traces of blood that would later be matched to Grace's DNA. On December 8th, Jesse Kempson was arrested and charged with Grace's murder. The following day, December 9th, police acting on information from Kempson's digital devices and GPS data located a suitcase in the scenic Waitakere Ranges, about 25 kilometers west of Auckland. Inside, they found Grace's body. The discovery brought a devastating end to the search, but marked the beginning of a new phase in the case. Grace's family, who had held on to hope to the darkest days, now face the unimaginable reality of their daughter's violent death. In a statement released through New Zealand police, they expressed their heartbreak while thanking investigators and the public for their support. "We are devastated by the loss of our beautiful daughter, Grace," the statement read. "We would like to thank everyone who has supported us during this difficult time, especially the New Zealand police who have worked tirelessly to find her." As the investigation moved toward prosecution, the case sent shockwaves through New Zealand and beyond. The brutal murder of a young traveler, seemingly at the hands of a man she had met through a dating app, raised uncomfortable questions about safety in the digital age. For Grace's family, friends, and a global community that had followed her story, the focus now turned to understanding how such a tragedy could have occurred and seeking justice for a life cut tragically short. In the weeks and months that followed Grace's death, a profound silence descended over the Millane family. The frantic search, the media attention, the desperate hope, all had been replaced by an overwhelming void. Back in Wickford, Essex, Grace's childhood home became a sanctuary of grief, where memories of their vibrant daughter live alongside the crushing reality of her absence. The first birthday after Grace's death arrived in December 2019. What should have been a celebration of her 23rd year became a solemn day of remembrance. Family and close friends gathered at a local church, lighting candles in Grace's memory. Jillian later shared that they had bought a birthday cake, as they would have if Grace were there, placing a single candle in the center. The ritual was both heartbreaking and necessary, a way to honor their daughter while navigating the uncharted territory of grief. "We still celebrate her birthday," Jillian explained in a rare interview. "We talk about her, share memories. It's important that she remains a part of our lives, not just a memory." The Millane family established a foundation in Grace's name, dedicated to supporting causes she had cared about and helping other families who had lost loved ones to violence. It became their way of channeling grief into purpose, ensuring that Grace's legacy would extend beyond her tragic death. In Auckland, the City Light hotel room where Grace had spent her final hours became a place of morbid curiosity. The hotel management eventually renovated the space, attempting to erase the physical reminders of the crime. But for those who knew what had happened there, the location remained a silent testament to the fragility of life and the darkness that can exist behind ordinary doors. The New Zealand community, which had rallied so strongly during the search for Grace, continued to show support in quieter ways. Flowers appeared regularly at the entrance to the Waitakere Ranges, where her body was found. Online memorials multiplied, with strangers from around the world sharing messages of sympathy for the family and outrage at the crime. As the legal process moved forward, the Millanes made the difficult decision to remain in New Zealand for the duration of the trial. They rented a home in Auckland, creating a temporary base from which to attend court proceedings. The decision meant spending an extended period away from their support network in England, but they felt it was important to be present as justice for Grace unfolded. The months leading up to the trial were marked by careful preparation. Prosecutors worked to build their case, reviewing forensic evidence, digital trails, and witness statements. The defense team, meanwhile, began crafting their strategy, which would later prove controversial and painful for Grace's family. During this period, details about Jesse Kempson's background emerged, painting a picture of a man with a history of violence against women. It was revealed that he had previously been accused of sexual assault and had served time for a violent home invasion. These revelations sparked public debate about why such a person had been free to meet and ultimately kill Grace Millane. The New Zealand government faced questions about its handling of violent offenders and its monitoring of those on parole. Advocacy groups for victims of domestic violence used Grace's case to highlight systemic failures in protecting women from known perpetrators. The discussion expanded to include the safety of online dating platforms and the responsibility of tech companies to screen users for violent history. For Grace's family, these broader conversations were secondary to their personal grief. They maintained a dignified silence throughout the pretrial period, speaking only through official statements and their legal representative. The weight of their loss was evident in the few photographs that emerged of them arriving at court, shoulders stooped, faces etched with exhaustion and sorrow. The Auckland community continued to offer support in subtle ways. Restaurant owners who recognized the Millanes during their daily walks would sometimes refuse payment for their meal. Strangers in the street would offer quiet words of encouragement. These small gestures of kindness became lifelines in an ocean of grief. As the trial date approached, media attention intensified once again. Journalists from around the world descended on Auckland, seeking to cover what had become one of New Zealand's most notorious criminal cases. The Millanes found themselves at the center of a media storm, their private pain transformed into public spectacle. To protect their privacy and maintain some control over the narrative, the family limited their interactions with the press. They worked closely with victim advocates to ensure their rights were respected throughout the legal process. This careful navigation of the public eye required tremendous emotional energy, adding to the burden they already carried. Meanwhile, in the digital spaces where Grace had once shared her adventures, a different kind of memorial was taking shape. Her Instagram account, which had documented her world travels with joyful abandon, became a virtual memorial. Thousands of followers left comments on her photos, sharing condolences and expressing how her story had impacted them. Some even retraced steps of her journey, visiting places she had been and posting images in her memory. Back in Wickford, Grace's friends struggled to make sense of the tragedy. They gathered at their favorite pubs, sharing stories and tears, trying to reconcile the vibrant woman they had known with the victim described in news reports. Many found themselves unable to process the violence of her death, focusing instead on celebrating the life she had lived. The University of Lincoln, Grace's alma mater, established a scholarship in her name, supporting students who shared her passion for travel and international business. The initiative was announced at a memorial service attended by hundreds of students, faculty members, and Grace's family. The service included readings from Grace's travel journal, offering glimpses into her thoughtful observations about the world she had been exploring. As the seasons changed in Auckland, bringing the Southern Hemisphere winter, the case moved through pre-trial hearings and legal preparation. The city's rhythm continued, but for those closely connected to the case, time seemed to move differently, marked not by calendars but by court dates and legal milestones. The Millane family marked each holiday and special occasion with rituals that acknowledged Grace's absence. At Christmas, they hung her stocking alongside the others, filling it with letters and mementos. These acts of remembrance were both painful and healing, allowing them to integrate Grace's memory into their changed family dynamic. In the Waitakere Ranges, where Grace's body had been found, nature continued its cycle. The native New Zealand flora flourished in the moist climate, gradually reclaiming the area that had become a makeshift memorial. Visitors continued to leave flowers and tokens, creating a living tribute that evolved with the season. As the trial date drew nearer, the Millanes prepared themselves for the difficult journey ahead. They knew they would hear disturbing details about Grace's final moment, confront the man accused of killing her, and relive the trauma of her death in a very public setting. The strength they would need to endure this process came from their love for Grace and their determination to see justice served. The long silence that had followed Grace's death was about to be broken, replaced by the voices of witnesses, lawyers, and experts who would piece together the events of December 1st to 2nd, 2018. For the Millane family and all those touched by Grace's story, the trial represented not just a legal proceeding, but a crucial step in the journey toward healing and closure. November 2019, the Auckland High Court. Almost a year had passed since Grace Millane's death, and now the man accused of her murder would face justice. Jesse Shane Kempson, now 28, sat in the dock, his expression unreadable as the trial commenced. Across the courtroom, Grace's parents, David and Jillian, watched intently, their faces masked the composure belying the storm of emotions within. The trial began with Crown Prosecutor Gareth Case outlining the case against Kempson. He described how Grace had met Kempson on Tinder on the evening of December 1st, 2018, and how their date had ended in her death. The prosecution would argue that Kempson had murdered Grace in his hotel room, then attempted to cover up his crime by cleaning the room and disposing of her body. The courtroom fell silent as Case presented the timeline of events, supported by CCTV footage that had become central to the prosecution's case. The jury watched as Grace entered the Sky City Casino, met Kempson, and later accompanied him to the City Life Hotel. The footage, once grainy and ambiguous, now carried the weight of damning evidence. The prosecution's case was built on a foundation of digital and forensic evidence. Detective Inspector Scott Beard took the stand, his testimony providing a comprehensive overview of the investigation. He described how police had traced Grace's last known movement, analyzed CCTV footage, and followed digital trails that ultimately led them to Kempson. Beard's testimony revealed the extent of the evidence against Kempson. Bloodstains matching Grace's DNA had been found in the hotel room, despite Kempson's efforts to clean the scene. Grace's blood was also discovered on a suitcase in Kempson's possession and on a carpet in the hotel service elevator. Perhaps most damningly, Grace's blood was found on a shovel in the trunk of Kempson's rental car. The courtroom listened intently as Beard described the discovery of Grace's body in the Waitakere Ranges. He detailed how police had used GPS data from Kempson's phone to track his movements to the remote area where the suitcase containing Grace's body had been left. The cause of death was determined to be pressure on the neck, consistent with strangulation. As the prosecution presented its case, a portrait of Kempson emerged that was deeply disturbing. His digital history revealed searches for violent pornography and extreme sexual content in the hours following Grace's death. Even more shocking, police had discovered photographs Kempson had taken with Grace's body after her death, images that showed him posing beside her corpse in various positions. The revelation of these photographs sent a ripple of shock through the courtroom. Grace's mother, Jillian, left the room in tears, unable to bear the details of her daughter's final moment. David Millane remained, his face hardened with grief and anger as he listened to the evidence against the man accused of killing their daughter. The prosecution called several witnesses who had encountered Grace and Kempson on the night of her disappearance. Bartenders from the establishments they visited testified about seeing the couple together, describing their interaction as seemingly normal. These testimonies painted a picture of an ordinary date that had taken a horrific turn. Perhaps the most powerful testimony came from the forensic pathologist who had examined Grace's body. Dr. Simon Stables provided detailed evidence about the injuries Grace had sustained, explaining how the pressure applied to her neck would have caused unconsciousness within seconds and death within minutes. His testimony made it clear that Grace's death was not accidental, but the result of deliberate violence. As the prosecution's case neared its conclusion, the focus shifted to Kempson's behavior in the days following Grace's death. Evidence was presented showing that he continued to use dating apps, matching with other women, while Grace's body was still in his hotel room. He had also searched online for information about decomposition rates and whether bodies could be identified from dental records. The defense, led by Ian Brookie, began its case with a controversial strategy that would cause further pain for Grace's family. Rather than denying that Grace had died in Kempson's hotel room, the defense argued that her death had resulted from consensual rough sex that had gone too far. The courtroom grew tense as Brookie outlined the defense's position. He suggested that Grace and Kempson had engaged in sexual activity that included strangulation, a practice sometimes associated with BDSM relationships. According to this narrative, Grace's death was a tragic accident rather than murder. To support this claim, the defense called witnesses who testified about Grace's previous sexual experiences. The strategy was deeply distressing for Grace's family, who had to listen as their daughter's private life was dissected in a public forum. The character assassination of Grace, even after her death, added another layer of trauma to an already unbearable situation. The defense also presented evidence of Kempson's searches for pornography featuring choking and strangulation, arguing that these demonstrated an interest rather than intent to kill. They suggested that Kempson had panicked after Grace's death, explaining his attempts to conceal the body and clean the hotel room. Throughout the trial, Kempson maintained his innocence of murder, though he did not take the stand in his own defense. His demeanor in court remained largely unchanged, a fact that many observers found chilling in its indifference. As the trial progressed, the contrast between the two narratives became stark. The prosecution painted a picture of a manipulative predator who had lured Grace to his hotel room with the intention of harming her, then coldly covered up his crime. The defense, meanwhile, attempted to portray Grace as a willing participant in a sexual encounter that had tragically escalated. The jury heard testimony from experts on BDSM practices who explained the importance of consent and safety measures in such activity. Their testimony undermined the defense's claim that Grace's death could have occurred during consensual activity, as there was no evidence of the communication and precautions that typically characterize such encounter. The prosecution's rebuttal focused on the timeline of events and Kempson's actions following Grace's death. They highlighted the fact that he had not called for emergency services, instead spending hours cleaning the room and researching how to dispose of a body. His subsequent behavior, continuing to use dating apps and meeting other women, suggested a lack of remorse inconsistent with the defense's narrative of an accidental death. As the trial entered its final days, the weight of evidence against Kempson seemed overwhelming. The prosecution had presented a compelling case, supported by forensic evidence, digital trails, and witness testimony. The defense's attempt to shift blame to Grace had been met with skepticism, particularly given the evidence of Kempson's calculated efforts to conceal his crime. The jury retired to consider their verdict after weeks of testimony. For Grace's family, the wait was agonizing. They had sat through every day of the trial, listening to painful details about their daughter's final hours and seeing her character questioned in court. The verdict would represent not just a legal judgment, but a validation of their belief in Grace's innocence and their quest for justice. After several hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the foreperson stood to deliver the decision. Jesse Kempson was found guilty of murder. The verdict brought a wave of emotion through the courtroom. Grace's family wept quietly, the tension of the past weeks finally giving way to a complex mixture of relief, sorrow, and vindication. Kempson showed little reaction as the verdict was read, his expression unchanged as he was led away to await sentencing. The revelation of the truth behind Grace's death, both the brutal reality of how she died and the cold-blooded nature of Kempson's action, brought a measure of closure to a case that had captured international attention. But for those who had loved Grace, the verdict was just one step in a long journey of healing without her. February 2020, the Auckland High Court. 3 months after the verdict, Jesse Kempson returned to court for sentencing. The proceedings carried a different weight than the trial, less about determining guilt and more about accountability and consequences. Grace's family sat in the same seats they had occupied during the trial, their presence a testament to their unwavering commitment to seeing justice through to its conclusion. Justice Simon Moore presided over the sentencing hearing, his demeanor reflecting the gravity of the occasion. The courtroom was packed with journalists and members of the public who had followed the case closely. Outside, a small group of advocates for victims of domestic violence held a quiet vigil, their signs bearing Grace's image and messages calling for an end of violence against women. The hearing began with victim impact statements from Grace's family. David Millane spoke first, his voice steady but filled with emotion as he addressed the court directly. Grace was not just a statistic or a news story, he said, his eyes fixed on Justice Moore. She was our daughter, our sister, our friend. She had dreams, ambitions, and a future that was stolen from her. The man who took her from us has shown no remorse, no understanding of the devastation he has caused. David described the profound impact of Grace's death on their family, the permanent void that now existed in their lives. He spoke of the holidays they would never celebrate with her, the milestones she would never reach, the grandchildren they would never know. His words painted a portrait of family forever altered by one man's action. Jillian Millane followed, her statement a powerful blend of grief and determination. She spoke of Grace's kindness, her adventurous spirit, and the joy she had brought to those around her. But she also addressed the defense's attempt to tarnish Grace's reputation during the trial. Our Grace was not able to speak for herself in that courtroom, Jillian said, her voice trembling with controlled emotion. So we had to listen as her character was assassinated, as her private life was dissected for public consumption. No family should have to endure such pain while grieving the loss of their child. Jillian's statement highlighted the secondary victimization that often occurs in cases of violence against women, where victims are blamed or their behavior scrutinized rather than focusing on the perpetrator's action. Her words resonated beyond the courtroom, contributing to a broader conversation about how the justice system treats victims of sexual violence. As the Millane family concluded their statement, the focus turned to Kempson's sentencing. The prosecution argued for a life sentence with a minimum non-parole period of at least 17 years. Citing the premeditated nature of the crime, Kempson's lack of remorse, and his attempt to conceal his action. The defense, meanwhile, continued to maintain that Grace's death had been accidental, though they acknowledged Kempson's failure to seek help and his attempts to cover up the incident. They argued for a shorter minimum non-parole period, suggesting that Kempson was not beyond rehabilitation. Justice Moore listened to both sides before delivering his sentence. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of the community's outrage and the family's pain. The murder of Grace Millane was senseless and brutal. Justice Moore began. She was a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, visiting our country to explore and experience new adventures. Instead, she encountered a man who would take her life and then treat her remains with contempt. The judge outlined the aggravating factors that had influenced his decision: the violence of the attack, Kempson's subsequent actions to conceal the crime, his lack of remorse, and the impact on Grace's family. He also noted the degrading and disrespectful treatment of Grace's body after her death. Justice Moore sentenced Kempson to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. The sentence brought a sense of closure to the legal proceeding, though for Grace's family, no punishment could truly balance the scales of justice. As Kempson was led from the courtroom, the Millane family released a statement expressing their gratitude to the New Zealand justice system and the public for their support. They also announced plans to return to England, ready to begin the next chapter of their lives without Grace, but determined to honor her memory. The sentencing marked the end of a case that had captivated and horrified New Zealand and the international community. But its impact would extend far beyond the courtroom walls, prompting discussions about violence against women, the safety of online dating, and the treatment of victims in the justice system. In the weeks following the sentencing, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern addressed the nation, acknowledging the collective grief and anger inspired by Grace's case. Grace Millane should be here today. Ardern said in a televised address, she should be continuing her journey, exploring our country and the world. Instead, we are left to mourn her and to confront the uncomfortable truths that her death has revealed about violence against women in our society. Ardern announced several initiatives aimed at addressing these issues, including increased funding for support services for victims of domestic violence and a review of how the justice system handles cases involving sexual violence. The government also launched a public awareness campaign about the dangers of online dating and the importance of safety measures when meeting strangers from the internet. The case also prompted changes in how New Zealand media report on cases of violence against women. Several media outlets adopted new guidelines aimed at avoiding victim blaming and focusing on perpetrator accountability. The shift represented a small but significant step in changing the cultural narrative around violence against women. For Grace's family, the return to England was bittersweet. They came home to a community that supported them throughout their ordeal, but also to the constant reminder of Grace's absence. The house in Wickford remained as she had left it, her room untouched, a shrine to a life cut short. The foundation established in Grace's name began its work, supporting causes she had cared about and providing assistance to other families who had lost loved ones to violence. The first project funded by the foundation was a scholarship for students from Grace's former school who wished to study abroad, continuing her legacy of adventure and cultural exploration. In Auckland, the City Light Hotel where Grace died underwent another renovation, this time a memorial plaque installed in the lobby honoring Grace and all victims of violence. The plaque became a quiet gathering place for those who wished to pay their respect, a small acknowledgement in the place where her life had ended so tragically. The Waitakere Ranges, where Grace's body was found, also saw changes. The local council installed a proper memorial site, providing a place for reflection and remembrance. The area, once known primarily for its natural beauty, now carried an additional significance as a place of pilgrimage for those moved by Grace's story. As the first anniversary of Grace's death approached, her family returned to New Zealand for a private memorial service. They visited the places Grace had been during her final days, not to seek answers, but to connect with the last moments of her life. The journey was deeply personal, a way of reclaiming Grace's narrative from the tragedy of her death and celebrating the joy of her life. The service, held at a chapel near the Waitakere Ranges, was attended by family, friends, and members of the New Zealand community who had supported them throughout their ordeal. Eulogies focused not on the circumstances of Grace's death, but on the vibrancy of her life, her kindness, her curiosity, her adventurous spirit. Grace lived more in her 22 years than many people do in a lifetime. Her father, David, said during the service, she saw the world not as a collection of countries to be ticked off a list, but as a tapestry of cultures, experiences, and connection. That is how we choose to remember her, not as a victim, but as a vibrant, loving young woman who embraced life with open arms. The anniversary of Grace's death also saw renewed calls for changes to New Zealand's parole system and for better monitoring of violent offenders. It emerged that Kempson had been on parole at the time of Grace's death, having served time for a violent home invasion. The revelation that he had been free to meet and ultimately kill Grace despite his criminal history sparked outrage and demands for systemic reform. The New Zealand government announced a review of the parole system, with particular focus on how offenders with histories of violence against women are monitored and assessed. The review would eventually lead to stricter parole conditions and increased supervision for high-risk offenders. As time passed, the immediate media attention on Grace's case faded, but its impact continued to resonate. The case became a touchstone in discussions about violence against women, online safety, and the treatment of victims in the justice system. Grace's name became synonymous with these issues, her story a powerful reminder of the real-world consequences of systemic failure. For the Millane family, life continued in its new normal. They found ways to honor Grace's memory while moving forward with their lives. The foundation they established grew, funding projects that reflected Grace's values and interests. They became advocates for victims of violence, using their platform to raise awareness and push for change. In a rare interview on what would have been Grace's 24th birthday, Gillian Millane spoke about the family's journey of grief and healing. There are days when the pain is still overwhelming, she acknowledged. But there are also days when we can focus on the joy Grace brought to our lives and the difference she continues to make even after her death. We carry her with us always, not as a source of sorrow, but as a reminder to live fully, love deeply, and make the world a better place in her memory. The interview highlighted the complex nature of grief and the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the unimaginable loss they had suffered, the Millane family had found a way to channel their pain into purpose, ensuring that Grace's legacy would be one of positive change. As the second anniversary of Grace's death approached, a documentary about her life and the case was released. The film, created with the cooperation of Grace's family, focused on celebrating her life while examining the broader issues her death had brought to light. It became one of the most watched documentaries in New Zealand's history, sparking renewed conversation about violence against women and online safety. The documentary also included interviews with the investigators who had worked on Grace's case, offering insights into the painstaking process of bringing her killer to justice. Detective Inspector Scott Beard spoke about the personal impact the case had had on him and his team. Grace's case affected everyone who worked on it. Beard revealed she was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's friend. Seeing the photos of her travels, hearing about her dream, it made her real to us in a way that doesn't always happen in these cases. That motivated us to ensure justice was served, not just for Grace, but for her family who had suffered so much. The documentary's release coincided with the announcement that New Zealand would introduce new safety features for dating apps, including identity verification and the ability to share location details with trusted contacts. The changes were a direct result of recommendations made in the wake of Grace's death, a tangible legacy of her tragic end. As years passed, Grace's case continued to be cited in discussions about violence against women and online safety. It became a case study in law schools and criminology courses, an example of how digital evidence can be crucial in solving crimes and how the justice system can fail victims even after their death. The Millane family continued their advocacy work, becoming respected voices in the movement to end violence against women. They spoke at conferences, participated in awareness campaigns, and worked with policymakers to implement changes that could prevent similar tragedy. In what would have been Grace's 25th year, her family traveled to Peru, one of the destinations on her original itinerary. They visited the places she had planned to see, carrying her photo with them and scattering her ashes in places she had dreamed of visiting. The journey was both heartbreaking and healing, a way of completing the adventure that had been cut short. We felt Grace with us every step of the way, Gillian later wrote in a blog post about the trip. In the mountains, in the ancient ruins, in the faces of the people we met, we saw the world through her eyes and understood why she loved it so much. It was our gift to her and her gift to us. The blog post went viral, shared by thousands around the world who had been touched by Grace's story. It was a testament to the enduring impact of her life and the way her family had transformed tragedy into a celebration of her spirit. Back in New Zealand, the 5th anniversary of Grace's death was marked with National Day of Remembrance for Victims of Violence. Events were held across the country, from candlelight vigils to educational seminars about healthy relationships and consent. The day had been established following a campaign led by the Millane Foundation and other advocacy groups. At the main event in Auckland, Gillian Millane gave a powerful speech about the importance of remembering victims, not just for how they died, but for how they lived. Grace was so much more than the final moments of her life, she told the crowd gathered in the city center. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. She was a traveler, a student, a dreamer. When we remember victims of violence, let us remember them in their entirety, not just as statistics or headlines, but as complex, vibrant human beings who deserve to live. The speech was widely shared and praised for a compassionate approach to remembering victims of violence. It encapsulated the philosophy that had guided the Millane family's advocacy work, focusing on celebrating life while working to prevent future tragedy. As a decade passed since Grace's death, her case continued to evolve from a current event to a historical touchstone. New Zealand had implemented significant changes to its approach to violence against women, from stricter sentencing for perpetrators to better support for victims. The dating app safety features that have been introduced in the wake of Grace's death have become standard globally, credited with preventing numerous potential assaults. The Millane Foundation had grown into a respected organization, funding projects across multiple countries that reflected Grace's values and interests, from scholarships for disadvantaged students to support services for victims of violence. The foundation ensured that Grace's legacy continued to make a positive impact. In a rare interview marking the 10th anniversary of Grace's death, David and Gillian Millane reflected on their journey of grief and advocacy. "There isn't a day that goes by when we don't think of Grace," David shared, "but our relationship with her memory has evolved. We've moved from the raw pain of loss to a more nuanced appreciation of the time we had with her and the ways her life continues to touch others." Gillian added, "We never wanted Grace's death to define her legacy. We wanted her life, her kindness, her curiosity, her joy, to be what people remembered. Through the foundation and the changes that have happened in her name, we feel we've honored that wish." The interview also touched on the ongoing debate around Kempson's potential parole, with his minimum non-parole period set to expire in the coming years. Discussions about his release had begun. The Millane family expressed their opposition to any early release, emphasizing the lack of remorse shown by Kempson and the brutal nature of his crime. Some people asked if we've forgiven him. Gillian said, "Forgiveness isn't ours to give. That's between him and his conscience, if he has one. What we want is justice, and for us that means ensuring he can never harm another woman." As the interview concluded, the Millanes shared their hopes for the future, both for themselves and for the causes they had championed. "We hope that the changes made in Grace's name will prevent other families from experiencing the pain we've endured," David said. "We hope that young women will be safer, that the justice system will be more responsive to victims, and that society will continue to confront the reality of violence against women." Gillian added, "Most of all, we hope that Grace's story will inspire people to live fully, to explore the world with open hearts, and to make a positive difference in whatever way they can. That would be the greatest legacy we could imagine for our beautiful girl." The interview ended with a photo of Grace, taken during her travels, her face alight with the joy and curiosity that had defined her too short life. It was a reminder that behind every headline about violence and tragedy lies a human story of dreams, relationships, and potential cut short. In the end, Grace Millane's story became more than a true crime case. It became a catalyst for change, a symbol of resilience, and a call to action. Her death revealed uncomfortable truths about violence against women and the dangers of the digital age. But her life, as remembered by those who loved her, continued to inspire kindness, adventure, and hope. Justice may come late, but it never vanishes. In Grace's case, justice was served through the legal system, but also continues to be served through the changes made in her name and the lives touched by her story. As the years pass and new cases capture public attention, Grace's legacy endures, not just as a victim, but as a young woman who, even in death, continues to make the world a better place.